The third one is going to be in Latin America, and this is the one that kind of pulls at my heartstrings, and we already have an event that's happening there, and the lens through which that model project is going to be developed is going to be revaluing what's already there. Going into the area and finding what it is they are doing well, whether it be artistry, whether it be music, whether it be spirituality, revaluing and using a model project that'll teach us how to value what's there before we arrived. So those are and then there's a fourth, a fifth one in Eastern Europe that's so undefined that I can't quite tell you where it's headed, but I believe it's going to head in the issue of migration of peoples, because Eastern Europe is very much involved in that. What you're going to see, I hope, by the time General Conference rolls around, is that you'll have 5 options for every local conference to duplicate within their own cultural vision so that we can begin to take those small bites and begin to address the issue of, continue to address the issue of poverty in a very specific way. I'm excited for what the GBGM, and this is in collaboration with all the agencies, is going to try to do. I've encouraged them to remember, that's a group that I lead, I've encouraged them to remember that model projects means model projects. It doesn't always mean success. So hopefully, if we're real, we'll have a model project that doesn't do so well. Because you also learn by what you fail at what you don't do well. But the intention is to do it well. Another idea that has come through our General Secretary, and this relates to someone talking about youth and young adults, we have the Peace Corps, and many of the people that come into mission work in the United Methodist Church, young people, have come by way of the Peace Corps. And did you know the Peace Corps came out of the United Methodist Church way back when? It was an idea. We didn't have the Peace Corps, but we had the idea through our US2s that find its way through these chain of events into the Peace Corps. Well, Ed Pop, who is the General Secretary, has asked us to consider putting together something called a Poverty Corps. And a couple of the ideas, it's very unformed, but a couple of the ideas about the Poverty Corps is that we'll not just send people out one by one, we'll send people out 2 by 2 at least, or a team of people for a small period of time in a very specific way to interact either relationally or task-wise with people in the midst of poverty. Watch for that, because I really do believe that will take fruition in the next year and a half. The General Board of Church and Society, where Deb is the president of that general board, has a whole statement and a whole position paper on how they are working to do advocacy for the elimination of poverty. It's a beautiful statement. They're working with our government. They are expanding slightly into the global arena, but primarily it's working with the US government in advocacy issues. I think one of the little pieces in which there's hope for us is that and you're going to see a bias, and maybe it won't be the first time you've seen it with me, but that there is a growing acceptance of the reality of the problem of climate change. However you see we got here, and that's how people disagree, there's a reality that we're in the midst of a global climate change, and the global climate change is something that has to be addressed and understood. And there is a beginning, I think, of a coalescing of scientists and theologians and politicians that are going to say, this is an issue we have to deal with. Global climate change, when you think of massive, awful droughts and flooding and blistering summers and very cold and very snowy winters, affect the marginalized and the vulnerable the most. I think that's a sign of hope that we're beginning to see. We're beginning to see all these people from all these disciplines saying, we may not agree on where it came from, but we know it's coming and it's here. I see that as a real sign of hope. I think people are talking about the allocation of our country's resources that pertains to infrastructure and social services, and I think that's a sign of hope. I think we're beginning to reclaim that sense that we are in this together. Whatever this is, we're in this together, and we need to care for each other. There are so many signs of hope, but the problem is just as incredibly daunting. But we begin where we can. I was almost going to do exactly what you were doing over there with the book, Henry, is that What are we doing in our local churches? And I was grateful that a woman came up to me and says, we pay our apportionments. You bet you are contributing to the work that the church is doing in the elimination of poverty. And don't let yourselves and don't let anybody forget that. By paying your apportionments, you are contributing in the United Methodist Church to a connectional system that has reoriented its work to try to address these issues head on and in a very specific and a very goal-oriented way. But the issue for me is that incremental change that we need to do, the one-on-one. And I was talking with Renee, and she was again advocating, because she does that well. And I was reminded again, I better be careful what she exactly told me, but the story that came to my mind as I was talking with her, and there are some of us that are just absolute advocates. That's who we are, that's how we relate to the world. But you know, sometimes being an advocate is pretty lonely. And I was telling her a story from, remember that old magazine, the Alive Now magazine? There was a story, and there was a piece of literature in there that I've never forgotten, and it talks about geese. And it talks about the V of geese and that the leader's in the front, and it keeps changing leadership, and we like the idea of the changing leadership. I do. But did you know in that story that talked about why the other geese were honking? Do you remember any of that? Why? To encourage the leader. When people are doing what they're supposed to do, they need the other people to encourage them. If we're not a natural advocate, if we're not a natural worker in a particular arena, we need those who are natural, or those who are actually there and before they've taken another break from it. They need the encouragement of the community. And so as churches, what we can do is encourage the people that are on the front lines, that are taking the stances, the people that are trying specifically to make a difference. Every one of us needs to make a difference, and every one of us needs to step back sometimes. So I talked to her about the honking geese, and that one of the things we can do as United Methodists is honk. We can honk, and we can encourage, and occasionally take our leadership there, and occasionally do what we need to do. But if we're tired or we're weary and we can't do that anymore, the least we can do, the very least we can do is honk. We need to work at changing our lenses of how we look at the world. We need to keep talking and being in relationship together when we agree and when we disagree. I am a great believer, as you have heard over these few hours, in the importance of being uncomfortable and the importance of valuing being uncomfortable, and recognize that each of us, every one of us, truly has to change our lifestyle of consumption. In whatever form we choose and however we do it, each of us has to. In this room, we have to figure out and realize that our consumption of fuel, of food, of water, of money, whatever it is, each of us, we have to change our patterns of consumption. We just do.